Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name's Brian, and in this video, I wanted to cover the Free Folk Heroes Box 2 that is slated for US release at some point in the future. I know shipping delays and all that really make things funky, but not all too long ago, the rules for these releases made it into War Council. Now, we've known about them for a really long time, but I do try to hold off to try and match up with some of these, but I just don't think I can wait any longer because this box has been highly anticipated by myself. I didn't know anything like this was coming, but I just wanted the giant commanders. So let's kind of peel back the layers and see what we get in this box. So the Free Folk Heroes Box 2 comes with 2 giants, and they're both characters, which is super sweet. So the first one we have is One Weg Wonder 1, or Wound, I don't know, however you want to say it. I don't speak giant, so it's, it's 1-1, but that's his full name at least. And then we also have Magmar Tun de Weg, and that's like just Mag the Mighty for short. I will not say their full names throughout this whole video and torture you for those who think I'm saying them wrong, but there's some interesting things about the way that this hero box kind of comes together. 1-1 is just a normal giant. It's character and has some different rules than what our regular giants do, but Mag the Mighty comes, I would almost say that he is probably his character or entity that comes with this. Is the first time it's ever been done in a hero box, but we can kind of say maybe neutrals kind of beat them to the punch, but I won't include that because Mag is very unique. So let's go ahead and start talking about 1-1, and then we'll get into Mag later since he has some interesting nuances to him. So 1-1 comes to us at 8 points and is speed 5 like all the other giants, and then instead of the Furious Swing, I believe is what their rule is called, or their melee weapon's called, he has the Pummeling Fist, which hit on 3s and throw 6 dice instead of that hitting on 2s and throwing 1 dice like the regular giants. We see that 1-1 is a little bit more tough than the other giants, having a 3+ defense save and a 4+ morale. So when we look at the next part of his card, we can see that he brings the Order War Cry, which is, coming up all over the place lately, it seems. But this just triggers at the start of a friendly turn. This unit performs 1 morale test, which are very likely to pass at 4+. And then on a success, you pick 1 enemy within long range, and it becomes panicked and vulnerable. For his melee attack, that's also tied to, it has the heart emblem on it, which means that it can never be stripped away, so you can never shut 1-1 down in terms of what his melee attacks actually do. He brings the critical blow and sundering rules, so he's kind of like Sworn Brothers kind of tied into one here. He also has, of course, the giant rule. He's got 6 wounds and only suffers 1 wound for every 2 unblocked hits from any attack or effect, and he can only suffer a maximum of 2 wounds from failing a panic test. So for 8 points, we are paying a little bit more than what we would get for a giant, and I know that people really like the idea of giants just pushing their damage through without having to deal with those saves, and with 1-1 kind of not having that ability, it might seem a little wonky at first, but when you think about what he actually does on the offensive side of things, first of all, you're going to be panicking and vulnerabling, I guess, anything that you charge, which is kind of how I think about him, at least, because typically I want to try and get the most out of all the tokens I'm going to be putting down on something, so he's going to be one of the few giants that takes advantage of the vulnerable token because the rest just go straight through. So getting back to that, if he's charging, getting his War Cry out, then that means that we're throwing 6 dice that hit on 3s, and that, if you want to get statistical on things, on average you should be hitting 4 of those 6 attacks, and then if you're re-rolling just to get hits instead of re-rolling for crits, you're probably bound to get 1 more out of that again. So 5 saves, or 5 hits, likely one of them being a 6, means that you're going to get, on average, 6 attacks through that are going to be sundering for your opponent. They'll be vulnerable and panicked, so you should be doing a pretty decent amount of damage with 1-1 here. You can use that panic token on something else. Like putting vulnerable and panic on something else, just to try and, if you're kind of hunting a a higher morale unit, and when I say high, I mean like a bad stat high morale unit, one of your other giants can just make sure they're getting that guaranteed panic test, and then having that panic token there to buff them up. So I think some of the discussions maybe center around like, is 1/1 better than a giant? And I think like he's a side grade from a giant for the most part. I think Warcry is still just such an effective ability in the game, and brings some of the two better tokens you can put out on things. Not to say that Weaken's a bad token, but Vulnerable and Panic make sure that you're doing the damage you need, and with 1/1 not being able to go directly through your opponent's defense like the rest of the giants can, he's kind of like his own little Wrecking Crew package, and I do think that he definitely has places in lists. It's just really the points, like if you have them available, if you can really trade, you know, a 1 point for a giant. And I guess you could even play 1/1 in a list that doesn't have the giant focus, and then just having him kind of run around being a little Wrecking Crew on his own. Plus, just getting access to Warcry is pretty valuable too, so you can use your smaller units in the army to kind of bubble wrap him or layer in front of your opponent, and then making sure that Warcry can get your smaller performing units to do a little bit better. And then once those have whittled down, then you can unpack 1/1 and get into them. So I think that he's a welcome addition to the Free Folk army, and I know for me, I was very disappointed that I hadn't seen 1/1 come out yet. And when this Free Folk Heroes box 2 came out and I saw the cover for the box, I was just elated to see that we were getting these character giants. So for me personally, on whether it's competitive or a more casual aspect, I think 1/1 has some places, maybe a little bit more in the casual camp, but I can definitely see him being at least moderately competitive. So Mag the Mighty is up next, and Mag's going to take up probably a good chunk, well, not a good chunk, pretty much all of the rest of this video, because there's some really cool, unique things that Mag brought with him that I wish they had elaborated on a little bit, but we'll get to that later. So Mag, no matter what you do with him, you have to pay 9 points for him. You just, you know, purchase him essentially for those 9 points, and then at that point you get to choose whether he's going to be your commander or not. So you can play Mag in an army where he's not leading it, but you can also just choose to have him be the commander, which is awkward, right? Because we're all used to not having to pay for those command attachments, and or not command attachments, but just commanders, and you know, we usually just kind of get them for free and they bring whatever. But you know, given the fact that Mag the Mighty is his own unit, it's pretty decent. It's kind of like thinking about things from the aspect of Joffrey when he brings his Kingsguard. Like, he has to pay for those guys instead of bringing them for free, so like, I get it. But it might be hard for some folks to swallow right away. So he still has the same speed 5 as a normal giant. He has the Chieftain's Fury attack, which hits on 3s and then throws 7 dice for that. He's got the 4+ defense and 4+ morale, so he kind of falls in line with the normal giants. He's got that giant rule, of course, the same one that 1/1 has and all the other giants. And then his Chieftain's Fury ability has Vicious, and then defenders do not roll defense dice. He also has an additional portion of this that says when Mag's destroyed, before being removed, he performs 1 Chieftain's Fury attack. So, and that can't be stripped from him as well. You know, all these giants make sure that they don't get kind of hit with control type things, since they are so points heavy. You really don't want to see them get shut down. So essentially, like, you've got your giant ability back now, where you're going straight through to defense dice, and throwing 7 attacks is rough for that. Like that's a ton of damage. We're looking at maybe just a little bit over on the average from what 1/1 would come up with, where actually you probably hit like 5 to 6 of these. And that's just me, like, just spitballing, not actually doing the math on the rerolling charge. But that's pretty decent. You're taking out at least a rank, and then with Vicious on top of that, you're getting those all-important panic checks to just kind of throw some more damage out there. So it's really not unlikely that Mag the Mighty could do something like, you know, 8 to 9 wounds, just average, depending on what type of unit you're going into. So why, you know, when you read that, it's like, that's good. He's good. Like, he's not, like, maybe not 9 points good on his own. I could see maybe including him in an army where he's not leading it. But when we think about what commanders bring to the game, they are always bringing cards that alter the existing, or not that they don't alter the deck. Well, they kind of do, right? The 3 commander cards go into the base tactics deck. And for free folk players, it's not a shock that the free folk deck doesn't really work that great with giants. There's very little within that deck that actually functions with giants. I mean, we've even after the tactics deck update, there still is minimal synergy with giants in general because the free folk they play this very wide type strategy with lots of different units and try to capitalize on the weaker parts of the units being overcome by the ability to disrupt or alter your opponent's game state with having all these different units hanging around. So what Mag does that's unique is that he ends up bringing an entire deck with him, not just the 3 or 6 extra commander cards that you would put in. So you end up throwing down 20 new cards that are not at all related to the free folk base tactics deck. So let's go through those. I don't think I need to talk so much more about Mag the Mighty in terms of the unit that he is, because like giants just do what they do. Like 1/1 fights real well and tries to get extra hits through chance. Like if you're charging, you can pick up all your misses and try and fish for 6s if you want to, especially if your first throw gets you a 6 or 2, and then he just like, you know, gets a lot of mileage out of vulnerable and panic tokens. Mag is kind of the same in that his 7 dice hitting on 3s go straight through, and then you're getting that vicious to alter those panic checks, make them worse. So like he's just chunking damage. They're both survivable. They have the, you know, the trademark 6 wounds that the giants normally have. So still tough to get through, especially with 1/1 being a 3+ save, which I just wish all giants were 3+. I don't think that 4+ is like, you know, I'm just complaining now about giants, but I just wish giants were just a little bit more tough. At any rate, what I want to do now is transition into this tactics deck, because that's where the bulk of our discussion, I think, is going to be centered around. So first up, the card we come across is Blitz, and this triggers at the start of a friendly monster unit's activation. That unit becomes vulnerable, and then until the end of the turn, that unit gains +2 to their charge distance, or +2 speed, sorry, and then can re-roll any charge distance dice. So this card is essentially meant to kind of put your giant at a little bit of a risk by having him become vulnerable, and then you trade that off by being able to connect really quick. So if your giant is doing a ton of damage when they're coming in, you're not too worried about the fact that they have that vulnerable token, and they still have the normal giant rule that says for every 2 unblocked hits, they only take 1. So going into the proper unit where you think you'll be able to maybe shave a rank off, especially looking at someone like Mag himself or 1/1 if you're running them together, which can be pretty pricey, but still, getting them to connect early and disrupt your opponent while the rest of your giants kind of plot up the table could be really beneficial. So Blitz is definitely a mighty welcome to the free folk arsenal when we're talking about monsters, because this specifically, just to call out, a lot of these cards trigger off of monsters. So when I do say monster, I'm also kind of including the mammoths in that. So there is a little bit of versatility and not just thinking about things from the lens of the giant. Next up, we've got Overrun. And Overrun, we're all quite familiar with this card by now, or at least should be. When a friendly combat unit surges forth is when this card triggers, and then instead of surging forth, you can perform 1 charge action. So I've always kind of had an awkward relationship with Overrun, especially when we're thinking about things like solos. They kind of have to be facing the right direction in order to charge first, because you need to make sure that you've got something in your line of sight to declare a charge against. But if you're in the right position or you get into someone's flank, it's not uncommon for giants to just really like chip away at a unit and get them after a couple turns, and then they should be poised to be able to make another charge if they need to. And Overrun is just another welcome card for giants because they are very aggressive and do like taking more than 1 action, especially charge actions. Next up, we have Hurl Boulder. This triggers when a friendly giant unit performs an action, but before resolving that action, that unit replaces that action with performing the following ranged attack. It's a long-range attack that hits on 3s, and you only throw 1 die. And then it states that if this attack generates any hits, instead of rolling defense dice, the defender suffers D3 plus 1 wounds or D3 wounds plus 1 wound for each remaining rank in that unit. So this card basically turns a giant into a piece of artillery for a turn. It's nice when you have cleared an area and you want your giants to do something, but since giants are pricey, they also have to make sure they're being extremely mindful of the scenario or objective that you're playing, and just being able to, from 12 inches away, kind of throw a d3 wounds +1 for each remaining rank can definitely make a big difference in how your attrition goes on other sides when you can't commit all your giants on. You can't commit your giants to the fight when they're getting away from a scenario that they or a scenario piece that they're really holding down well. Especially if you're thinking about throwing this thing into combat, that's also quite nice because you don't have to worry so much about the panic checks on your giants, because no matter what, they're not going to be able to lose a ton of wounds from those failed panic checks, and they have a pretty decent morale, so they're less likely to fail it. So Hurl Boulder, another welcome addition to giants. Next up is Defiant Roar. This triggers when a friendly monster unit passes a morale test. You target all enemies engaged with them. Those units then become weakened. So this is just a nice little defensive piece that you can add to giants. Your opponent's going to be attacking them, of course, right? I mean, that's what we do in this game. We attack each other with dice, whether, hopefully you're not just playing against a gun line, avoid those Nice Watch matches. But giants are survivable. That's not much of a question. But then when we're weakening our opponents, that just makes them more survivable. So trying to play that attrition-focused game with giants just becomes a little bit easier. And if your opponent ends up taking the tactic zone quite a bit, because if they are playing against a Mag Commander deck, they are probably not going to be very yippy about you drawing a bunch of these cards, because they are all pretty dang good for giants. So you will miss out on the opportunity to throw out tokens that aren't just panic invulnerable if you happen to be running 1/1 along with you, but just being able to get those weakened tokens out just for existing, especially being able to trigger this card on not your active turn, is pretty nice for this, because a lot of these cards are very active, in that you have to be the person activating the unit in order to get them off, so there's a little bit of clunk in the deck there, but this one lets you do this outside of your normal activation, so it's a nice little piece of counterplay that can work to your advantage, especially if you're being double teamed. Next up, we have the Last of Their Kind, or Last of Their Kind. Sorry, I added an extra word there. This triggers when a friendly giant unit is destroyed, which none of us like to see happen, but one other friendly giant unit performs one charge or attack action. So this is just another way to kind of leverage some more attritional pieces. Like I said, we don't like to see giants go down because they are quite a thick amount of points invested into our army, and when we lose one, that's every time we attack, that could be maybe 1 or 2 ranks a turn, depending on how you're fighting or how well you're doing. And this is just another cool way to look at this too, is like, if you are getting those attacks in when the giants are wounded, they are doing quite a bit of work, and once your opponent finally takes them down, they'll have that unit there that in theory should be pretty worn down, or they might be getting into them with a new unit. This way you can kind of just get them from a different angle with the giant into the unit that killed yours, or you could put some effort on the another side of the table, because you don't have to be like within range of anything to do this. It just happens, like it covers the whole table. So you can try and say, okay, well, this giant's gone, but now I'm going to try and use another giant to actually get some work done on this other side of the table. It's just a free action for attacking or charging, and I think that it's like I said, I don't ever want to say losing a giant is good, but with this particular card, losing a giant isn't the worst thing in the world for you. You get to actually take some advantage and get some attacks, especially if that giant hasn't activated. You really don't technically lose out on the activation, even though you would prefer that your opponent's killing activated models instead of unactivated ones. Next up, we have Monsters from the North, and this triggers when an enemy in short range of a friendly monster unit activates. The enemy suffers 1 panic test with -1 to their roll for each friendly monster unit in short range up to -3. On a failure, they also suffer +1 wound for each friendly monster unit in short range up to +3. So this is just another way to kind of get some extra attritional advantage, which kind of seems to be a swirling theme around this deck because it understands that giants are expensive and you want to try and get the most out of them. So when your opponent activates, this is just another way to make sure that your opponent's not being as effective into you. If you're picking on a decent to middling to bad range morale unit, it just means that you're likely to get them to fail that. And even if they're only near one giant, which hopefully they're by at least two, I think it'd be hard to get them by three of them because you'd be centering so many points in your army around just one area. And like I said, when I say monsters, it does mean we're including the mammoths, but I mostly would care about giants in most of these situations. But just being able to maybe get enough wounds out to knock off another rank so that you're making sure your giants are sticking around a little bit longer is just another welcome aspect for the giant theme, or the monster centered theme. I'm going to keep saying monster, or I'm going to keep saying giant but meaning monster. I hope you were all getting that down because I don't want to discount the mammoth's existence right now, but for me, I'm just a giant person. But I think I'm getting to end game talk before we're actually there. We still got a couple more cards to go. So with that, flipping over the next card, we've got Chieftain's Orders. This is specifically starting at Mag the Mighty's activation for the trigger. You can replace his action with one friendly giant within long range performs one action. You also have the dual mode on this card where you can say at the start of any turn you can draw one tactics card. This is I can't remember what the name is from the rest of them. I think like Grey Worm and Tywin Lannister have this. I think it's Commander's Orders or Captain's Orders, something like that, where they can essentially do the same thing. This is just another great way to, like, Mag the Mighty is fighty, and if he is also needing to hold down a scenario instead of using his aggressive force to affect the table, you're just able to make sure that he's still doing something with his activation, which is important in a list that's really monster focused. Well, I mean, in this case, it's going to be giant focused because it does only affect giants. He can't tell mammoths what to do. It's just a way to make sure that you're getting the most out of your army, considering that the footprint is going to be typically fairly small. And, I think more so than any other person who's rocking this type of card, I think Mag takes advantage of it the most, even though you really don't want to be sacrificing his massive melee output to make something else happen. But there is the ability to draw another card, which every single card in this deck is pretty phenomenal. So I could see definitely taking advantage early game of just chucking this to just draw another card right away to try and not just burn through the deck a little bit quicker, but to be a little bit more aggressive and not having this clog your hand up in the early game. Next up we have Enrage. So this card triggers at the start of a friendly monster unit's activation. That unit suffers 2 wounds, and then until the end of the turn, that unit may reroll any attack dice and the defenders become panicked. So at first, you're kind of looking at this card and being like, well, this is probably better for someone like Mag or 1/1 or the Mammoths, because having a regular giant suffer 2 wounds to just reroll the 1 attack die that they have that's hitting on 2s is really not that great. The panic token's nice, but then you have to peel back the layers a little bit. Maybe this is more apparent to people than it was to me when I first took a look at the card, because I kind of identified this as being one of the weaker cards in the deck right away, but I do think it's actually one of the more strong ones, especially on our base giants, because you have to remember that when the unit's suffering those 2 wounds, that means that when our giants are taking their swings, that's adding to the wounds that they actually do on their attack. So like you're kind of sacrificing some of the giants' resilience or their health pool, right? Their ability to stick around to get some of those extra wounds out right away. It's one of the things that I think people are really scared of when they play against a regular giant, is like, okay, well, I need to do enough damage to get this thing down in one shot, because I do not want to be stacking extra wounds to where they're just doing D3 plus a rank. So like with this one, on average, you're likely to wipe out an entire rank with every swing you take with a regular giant, especially considering that you're going to directly go to a panic check or a morale test or a panic test, and then they're going to become panicked, so they're the odds are rough for them on whether they're going to be able to pass through that or not. So I do think this is good on a 1/1 or mag, because you do want to be re-rolling dice if they're locked in combat, because of course you just want to re-roll dice. But it's also decent on the normal giants. You get the 6% chance to fail their attack, right? I'm pretty sure that's what the percentage is on a 2+ re-rollable on 1d6. And then it might be 8%. I think it's 8%. But being able to get those extra wounds across and the panic check is just really good for them. So I think that Enrage is definitely one of my more favored cards in this deck, looking at it through the scope of just your normal Savage Giant, or being able to get some extra value out of, or extra assurance out of Mag or 1/1 for whatever reason. I forgot his name for a hot minute. You can do some really cool stuff. I think, if I recall, I just have to check real quick, because I think you can kill yourself with Mag and then just perform the Chieftain's Fury attack. So yeah, when he's destroyed, it doesn't matter who is destroying him. If you're using that card to get the extra wounds on, I mean, it's not the greatest, because you won't get to finish your attack. So yeah, that probably sucks. Never mind. Don't do that. Don't trigger your Chieftain's Fury attack on Mag the Mighty unless there's some really wonky, not skeezy, but weird thing that you can do. I'd say janky thing you can do that means that, killing him helps you somehow. I'm not 100% sure on that one, if there's a situation where that would happen, but it's an option available to you, I guess. The unit would still be panicked, so there's that. At any rate, the next card we come up to is Trample. So this triggers when a friendly giant unit performs a charge action, but before resolving that action, you can replace it with pivot this unit, then move 10 inches, moving through units. If it ends over a unit, it instead stops 1 inch away. For each non-solo unit it moved through, or that it would have ended on, suffers D3 wounds. So this is just the basic trample action that comes off of the Mammoth. I don't know if this is something that I'm really all that intense about. I think that trample is probably not an amazing ability anymore. I think that it went from being too good to being not good enough. And it's cool to kind of get some neat positioning if you happen to be engaged with an opponent. That's neat. That's fun. But I don't know how much, maybe on the table this card is more attractive than in my head, but it's definitely a card that I would probably try and cycle out of my hand a little bit quicker than some of the other ones. But this is probably my low man on the totem pole type of deal, in terms of how I would grade these cards from a 1 to 10 scale. Just not a fan of it, but I can see that it has application, and it's at least cool or cute. I'd say it's cute more than cool. So the final card we come up to is Shrug It Off. This triggers when a friendly monster unit performs an action, but before resolving that action, you can replace the action with this unit restores up to 3 wounds. So this is just another thing that, in the time that I've played mostly giant lists in, the old world of Ice and Fire, I haven't tried it in the new one just yet, but when I did play against opponents with a list like this, they were very cognizant of the coin zone, but they had to kind of balance, right? Because if on the top of their turn, if they don't take the coin zone, it means that or the wealth zone, it means that I'm healing a giant, and that's not good for them, because giants are hard to kill for the most part. Unless you're specifically teched into doing something like that, giants are difficult to get rid of. So what they would often do then is try and take that zone from me to stop me from healing up my giants, but then what that does is leave the combat zone open, and if I have wounded giants on the table, it's likely that they are in combat, so that they're exchanging the active role of trying to get through the giants for taking more damage from my giants because they're wounded if they're worried about me healing them. And just taking that attack action means that I'm getting a lot of damage through, especially if you're looking at someone who's really, kind of one of their main attractors for why the unit is on the table is because they have a high armor save, or a good armor save, a good defense save. I've been playing so many games lately. The save is superfluous. Like the term of what an armor save or defense save just does not matter to me so much anymore. So I'm just gonna say the thing that stops you from dying, the die roll, right? So I think that having this card available to you lets you kind of make sure you're taking both of those rolls. If you're sitting there on one wound and it's wasting the amount of energy to get like that big old fight through to kill a unit just to get charged by another one and get a unit taken off the table might not be that valuable of a thing, because there definitely is value in staying locked in combat with a unit that is not at its highest capacity, that you might be overkilling so much, so that you can stop a unit behind them charging into that giant. I know that might not sound right when I say it, but if you think about it on the table, it makes sense, right? Especially when we consider what contesting is like right now, where your wounds as a solo matter. You could actually heal yourself up to a point to where your opponent is no longer able to contest you, and you're scoring one of those objectives that you happen to be sitting on, or a table quarter, whatever scenario element it is you need to score. You're able to do that by getting those wounds up on you. So in general, I'm very, very happy with the way that this deck turned out. From a casual standpoint, playing with these powerful giant characters is just a treat. I know that when Free Folk first came out, I basically windmill slammed my money on the table to get them, in hopes that these characters would be available to me to play in the future, since the giants were in that main in the starter box. So for so long I've been waiting to see them, and I even had weird theories. I was like, oh yeah, you could make a giant NCU and they could take up 2 zones on the tactics board when they take it, because they're so big. That's hoop dreams, but I'm happy to see that things shook out the way that they did. I'm very satisfied with the way that the tactics deck came out altogether. The thing that I'm dissatisfied with for the tactics deck is that Mag is the only one who's able to be the commander in this. I think there are several cards within that tactics deck that could have been specifically Mag's. They could have picked 3 of those cards and said, these are Mag's cards, this is what he does, and then the rest of those 7 cards are just the generic giant deck. And 1/1 could have brought 3 cards of his own, or 6, right? But you get what I'm saying. You know how to play this game. So he could bring his 3 unique cards in, and I'm sure some fluff bunnies out there for the Ice and Fire universe would not be super happy with the idea that 1/1 is commanding an army, but I do think that we have plenty of commanders in the game that are more melee focused, that are they're just set to fight, and with some of 1/1's fluff around him or his story behind him. I shouldn't call it fluff because it's an actual story. Not that fluff in war games is an actual story, but I'm sure some people would just twitch a little bit when I say that, but one way or the other, right? So 1/1 could have some cool abilities. He could have a card that says when he destroys a unit, he could he could place a corpse pile within short range or long range of himself, just to show that yeah, he's a vegetarian and doesn't eat people, or something that could show that he would be a little bit more booze fueled, he's motivated by wine. So maybe there could be something tied in with there. I'm sure that the developers and designers had thought of something like this, and maybe there's a specific reason why they didn't do it, and who knows, maybe George Martin, R.R. Martin, didn't want to have 1/1 be a commander in the game. I'm not sure. There's a bunch of different decision matrices that they could have gone down that led them to the box being designed the way that it is right now. But I do wish in my giant loving heart that 1/1 could have been a commander to offer some versatility to the arm, or versatility to the Free Folk lineup, and that Mag the Mighty could still have his thing going on. I just thought it would have been cool to get 2 commanders out of this instead of just the one, and having a really cool, powerful character that you may or may not take often. So I think we're getting to the point in the conversation where I need to cinch it up a little bit before this drones on for an hour over 2 characters. But there's definitely a 6-point elephant in the room, and that's the War Mammoth discussion that we need to have, at least, that kind of incorporates this, because, or gets incorporated into this, because the tactics deck itself for Meg the Mighty does reference monsters, and outside of the giants that we have available, the War Mammoth is the only other monster that we have in our roster. Now it's 6 points, which is fairly inexpensive compared to the giants, especially when we factor in the average of like 1/1 and Meg being the, having the commander being such a huge drain on the army points wise. But I don't know if it's that trample is the issue, and that trample in this tactic deck needs to change along with the one on the Mammoth, or if it's that the morale stat on the Mammoth really needs to change, because 6+ is not something that I want to be banking on. Although in a list that is mostly comprised of giants and mammoths, you don't have to worry about the Mammoth killing your things. But the core of the issue with that is not that it's not that I'm worried about the Mammoth doing the D3 damage to my guys on my opponent's turn. I'm more worried about my opponent being able to put my Mammoth out of position. And when you have an army that is so elite and has such a small footprint, you really can't afford to bring something that is so easily disrupted by your opponent's actions. I do think there needs to be some kind of change to the Mammoth. I'm not quite sure what that needs to be, whether trample needs to be adjusted along with the card in the main deck, which would probably be the way I'd like to go with it, because I'd like trample to be more valuable in this deck. But also some of the Mammoth stats with trample, as with the way it is, doesn't quite work. And like I said, it's doubly unfortunate, first of all, because the rules haven't really been put in our hands quite yet, outside of printing off the cards and playing that way. There's something different about getting the physical cards in your hand that kind of make you feel like the edition has been solidified, so to speak. But also, the other reason why I find it unfortunate is because with a list like this that would be centered around monsters, the Mammoth offers up a very inexpensive option, well, inexpensive in quotes relative to the list, right? Option that could be slotted into this list to try and make a little bit room for maybe an extra NCU. You could go from like 1 to 2. I don't know. Maybe the giant list could hang with 1 NCU, but it would be maybe a little rough. But who knows? I haven't actually sat down and built like my ideal list for this type of mechanic of just having a bunch of monsters, but just having an extra point here or there is nice. It's the difference between being able to put another unit in your army and then needing to flow up like superfluous NCUs. But who knows? Maybe a 3 NCU giant list is cool. Now that Free Folk doesn't really have access to a bunch of cheap NCU options, I think maybe 2 would be fine. But now we're getting into list building stuff, and I think I've already gone on long enough. I feel like it's somewhat warranted because it's unprecedented that a character has brought an entire deck with them. And for a long, long time, any Free Folk player that's played tons of giants, that wasn't just the early days of you need to have something different other than just Tormund and a bunch of stuff, or Mance and a bunch of stuff. It's welcoming to have a deck that feels like it synergizes decently with your giants. It's not to say that the new base tactics deck does not have some synergies within it for giants. It's just that this one is just basically, it's painted on the front of it. This is the giant deck essentially. So I hope you enjoyed this. It's been not just a long video, but a long time since I've actually put out any Ice and Fire content. I know I had a channel update that I posted to my channel not too long ago that kind of talked a little bit about my overall disposition towards the games that I typically play right now between War Machine and Ice and Fire and 40K. Now we're rolling in Conquest into that, but I do really enjoy everything that's going on with Ice and Fire right now, even if I'm not super yippy about the Mammoths. So I am looking forward to trying to make these videos a little bit more regularly, just to try and cover some of those new releases, since I'm pretty sure a lot of you have been sitting on them and wondering what's the deal with some of them. Or maybe you don't, you just need something different to listen to, and that different is me droning on for almost 40 minutes about Free Folk giants. So thanks for sticking all the way through to the end if you made it to this point. I do appreciate it. Other than that, I guess it's been so long since I've made an Ice and Fire video that I don't really know how to end them, other than I hope that your releases come to you soon and you're getting your giants I was gonna say on the table, and then I forgot that like this is the chase sign off, and I don't even think he'll make it to the end of this video at this point. So maybe I can say I hope you get your giants on the table, but I just won't have the little beep boop, and that's his thing. It works for him, and it definitely is a good sign off. But now I've already dragged this out for another freaking minute, Brian. Anyways, this is the Midwestern goodbye. If you don't know what that is, you just basically, you have to start saying goodbye about 10 to 15 minutes before you actually want to leave, so you can exchange all your pleasantries and feel like you're having that slow transition to a leave instead of the abrupt cutoff, which is weird considering that most of my videos abruptly cut off, which I think this one's going to do now before I hit the 40-minute mark. So thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope you enjoy whatever game you're playing these days.